Okay. All right, so the consumer price index CPI measures the monthly change in a price paid by US consumers, right? So it doesn't really necessarily measure the spending, but it measures the change of the prices being paid to consumers. When you are buying a product, how did the product change? How did the product influence from 10 Rand to 12 Rand, from $1 to $2, from $10 to $5? So it measures that. What other changes have been happening, in a global market in the US regarding whatever that they are selling. So there's a different types of consumer, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, that you can get, and it also breaks down in terms of category of price index, of Consumer Price Index. So the Bureau of the Labor Statistics is called the BLS. The Bureau of the Labor Statistics calculate the CPI as weighted average of the price for the basket of goods and the services, the representative of the aggregate of US consumer spending. So it's all about how much these guys are spending, how much the price have moved from the last spending to the new spending, right? The movement, the changing of the movement from the last spending to the next spending. So it actually calculated by the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Again, these are the guys also that they deal with NFP as well, the non-farm payroll. The CPI is one of the most popular measures of inflation and deflation. The CPI report uses the different survey methodology, prices, samples, and index ways than the producer price index, the PPI. So now, when the CPI release, the next news that come, it's PPI, right? So the CPI start, the following day, it's PPI. It's that consumer price index, what people has been consumed, has been paying, and how the influence shades between the price of last month to the this month. Then the following day, they will release the producer price index, now to measure why did the price has been increased or decreased, right? Based on that consumer price index, based on how much people have been spending to how much produce has been produced and how much they've been increasing or decreasing on their product, which measures the change in the price received by US producers of a good and the services. All right, guys, if you do have a question, please don't forget to stop me and ask me immediately, or send a message on the chat. So the consumer price index measures the overall change in a consumer price based on a representative basket of the goods and the services over time. The CPI is also most widely used measures of inflation, closely followed by the policymakers, financial makers, business, and the consumers. The widely quoted CPI is based on an index covering on 93% of US population, while a related index covered the wage earners and critical workers used for cost of living adjustments to the federal benefits. The CPI also is based on about 94,000 price quoted collected monthly from some of 23,000 retail and services established, as well as 43,000 rental houses. So if you can see, it's based on 94,000 price quoted. This price quoted in a month, there's a retail price. There's also a housing price, right? So you can see that what actually contribute to consumer price is not what we are actually buying as a retail people, retail price or retail product, but also it actually contribute to all the way to the housing, rentals, to investment, to everything that people purchase in US. So the housing rents are used to estimate the change in a shelter cost, including unoccupied housing that account for nearly a third of the CPI. Right. So the understanding the consumer price index, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, collect about 95,000 prices monthly from some of the 23,000 retail and the service established. Although the CPI index calculated from the data both contain the word urban, the more broader based and widely seated on the two covers 93% of the United States population. So you can tell that it's a lot of population that this news release is actually based on. This news release is actually based on over 93% of population of US. So that is why it has so much volatility in a market when you are trading, because it's actually based with a lot of people, and a lot of industry as well. The shelter category prices accounting for nearly a third of the overall CPI are based on the survey of rental prices for the 3,000 housing units, which is then used to calculate the rise in the rental prices as well as the owners. Equivalent, the owners equivalent category models the rental equivalent for owners occupied housing to properly reflected housing cost share of the consumer price spending. All right. So what are the type of consumer price index that we can get in the market? Anyone? Any type of price consumer index that we think we get in a market? Hey, welcome, Kolani. All right, so it's a BLS publishes two indices each month. The consumer price index for the urban consumers is the CPIU, right? Represents 93% of US population not living in the remote rural areas, and it doesn't cover a spending by people living in the farmhouses, institution, or in a military bases, because these are government houses. When you talk about farmhouses, these are houses that maybe someone is just built a house on their farm. There's no much more that they pay in terms of the rates, electricity, and so on and so forth. Again, it doesn't cover people who are staying in the rural areas. Yes, in states also there's a rural areas in the United States, guys. So not only this side, everywhere. The CPIU is also the basis of the widely reported CPI numbers that matter to the financial market. The BLS also published the consumer price index for urban wage earners and credential workers. It's called the CPIW. So you see two types, CPIU and the CPIW, right? The CPIW, it actually means consumer price index for urban wage earners. So these are people who are working nice, who have actually good job, who stays in a good place, middle density to suburbs, places, who actually get a revis and all those stuff. So that's a part 2 of consumer price index that is being released each and every month. The CPIW covers the 23% of the United States population living in a household with income derived predominantly from, I can see there's a question. LSM. What is the LSM, my brother? So the population living in a household with income derived predominantly from credential employment, right? So these are CPIW, right? CPIW, employment or jobs with an hourly wage. Okay, so these are actually like us, people who are working, who get paid every month, who get paid with their wages also calculated in hourly. Yeah, so their CPI, it's a CPIW. But again, when they're releasing the consumer price index, it's a combination of these two CPI being released at one time, being released in a single day. Okay. All right, so let me see, we good? All right. We are here. The inflation rate. All right, anything about the consumer index that you want to ask, any question or something like that? All right, so remember we said the consumer index is actually contribute to the inflation, right? It does contribute to the inflation. So here's how you can see how these guys contribute to the inflation of the country, inflation of the United States. Once it's contributing on the inflation of the United States, it definitely translates an impact to our daily basis life, to our rand. We seen yesterday a rand to a dollar start spiking up, goes all the way up, right? It's because of how this inflation rate or the CPI contribute to the inflation, and it translates everything to what do we do the daily basis. So inflation rate equal to the new CPI prior to CPI times 100. The inflation rate can be calculated for a given month or annual period. In either case, the appropriate new and prior period must be selected. The inflation rate is also reported as a percentage and is often positive, assuming a current market price are appreciated, right? So I have a small diagram, a small picture there that we can be able to see. You can see the 8 major groups of the consumer price index. So these are the 8 major groups that contribute for the calculation of consumer price index. So you can see housing is there. There's a share of housing, what we are talking about. There's a food and a beverage. So they do look also on an industry that produce food and the beverage, which is the drinks, alcohol and so on and so forth. They look also on the medical care, the industry that deals with the medical, recreation, what other strategic comes, from United States. Is there Elon Musk, going to go to a Mars again? Is he going to introduce something new, and so on and so forth. And then there's other goods and services that are being included. Education and communication as well. It's included. Communication has become one of the biggest player in a consumer price indexes because of the social media, how social media is actually doing these days. There's Twitter, which is buzzing at the moment. Twitter, through Elon Musk, tried to buy Twitter and so on and so forth. Then you come with the transportation. Transportation is one of the biggest industry in terms of contributing in the economy. If they're not moving, if maybe there's no lack of fuel, if fuel is high, it's always going to get high price. They're going to get a little bit high. So they calculate all those things and then give us the one release, so that you and me, we can see the release and we can predict or the indicator of the next movement of the market. All right, any question? So far so good? So far so good? Okay, all right. It's so far so good, then that's good. All right, now we are on the CPI categories. What are categories of CPI? We already checked the CPI categories. Maybe we can see the percentage form, how these guys they contribute to the consumer price index. Okay. All right. So the monthly CPI release from the BLS leads with a change from the prior month for the overall of the CPIU, as well as its key subcategory, along with an adjusted changes over the year. The BLS detailed a table shows the price changes from the variety of goods and the services organized by the 8 umbrella spending category. So these are the 8 umbrella spending category: housing, commodities, food, energy, education, healthcare, transportation, and others. This is what we actually saw on a previous column. And you can see housing is actually contributing on a 32%, in terms of the CPI. So this is what actually measures a lot, because housing, it includes a lot of things. It includes water, it includes revenues, it includes electricity, it includes a lot of things when it comes to housing. So it's most important. It's very, very major important. All right. Okay, I think we're good on here. How is the CPI used? The CPI is widely used by the financial market participants to gauge the inflation, and by the Federal Reserve to calibrate its monetary policy. So the business and the consumer also use the CPI to make informed economic decisions, right? So the inflation, the Federal Reserve, they're not going to have informative, release information without seeing the CPI, without seeing how much people they are spending, how much product it's much more higher or lower, how much can we be able, to increase or to decrease about our, the inflation rate of that specific month. So since CPI measures the change in consumer purchase power, it is often a key factor in pay negotiation. The Federal Reserve, the Fed, used the CPI data to determine the economic policy, with also targeting the inflation rate of 2%. The Fed may enact monetary policy to stimulate the economy should the market grow slow, or enact contractionally monetary policy should the economy and therefore price become to grow too quickly. So in order the Feds to make a decision of the inflation rate, they need to understand the CPI. So they need these BLS people, they need to release the report. Then the Feds, they took the report, and now they start taking the decision and see where exactly they can be able to go. Tolani, my man, maybe you need to log out and log in again, my man, because I think everyone else can hear. I think you need to log out and log in again. Again, guys, there's only 5 minutes, as the 40 minutes of Zoom session does give us. So just rejoin again once it catch, so that we can go on an analysis of the consumer price index and see what has been happening on the chart. So for now, let's just finish the presentation before we go on a chart. All right. And they're responsible to the higher than desired inflation rate via the CPI. The Feds always adjust the price index. We get the price, the CPI monthly, every month, not weekly, every month. Remember, it works along with the Federal Reserve. Before the Feds release their rate, monthly rate, they need to understand what consumer index happened, what actually did the price grow or decline, right? So it's a monthly basis. It's a monthly basis event. All right. How CPI in the forex affects the market? So traders use the changes in the CPI data release to assess the strength of the currency in the forex market. Changes in the CPI determine the levels of the inflation. It also influences the decision taken on the interest rate. Hence, the major determinant of the value of the currency. When the CPI or the core CPI comes out, the higher than the expected, the currency increases in the value relative to other currencies, and the forex market become more bullish, right? This is because of the higher CPI reflects economic growth and the inflation. So the higher the CPI, the higher it shows a little bit of a signal on inflation. This is because the higher CPI reflects economic growth and inflation. As inflation continues to grow, the central bank is likely to hike the interest rate, which results to the currency appreciation when the CPI or core CPI comes out lesser than expected, right? So if everything is all based on the CPI before the Feds, all based on the CPI before the Feds. So we see yesterday CPI, today it's PPI. Yesterday it's CPI, today it's PPI, what it means and that effect it can have on a USD. So yesterday is 1307 when had CPI consumer price index. Today it will be the producer price index. After yesterday's strong reading of US CPI inflation data, attention will once again turn to inflation, but this time there will be news from a different segment of the economy. A bond yield remains low, and the US dollar is struggling to maintain on a Tuesday upwards momentum, despite consumer price reaching their highest level since 2008. So this is what consumer price index reaches the highest since 2008. So the key indicator here will be today's PPI, produce price index. So we need to look on this type of news. The producer price index comes after consumer price index. I'm sure a lot of people that didn't see today, that today there should be the producer price index data. So the Federal Reserve also come after this data, there will come a Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell. I think you've been seeing a lot of news of Jerome Powell becoming one of the most guy that when he speaks, the whole economy moves. Everything moves up and down. So it is scheduled to testify on the economy outlook and the recent monetary policy action before joint economic commitment in Washington. The testimony consists of two parts. The first is preparing the sentiment, followed by the question and answers session with the consumer part of the question answers. In the testimony may concern the significant tendency of the bond price to move symmetrically in a relationship to income. Right. All right, guys. So these are some of the criticism of the CPI. Over the years, CPI has frequently drawn in a criticism with that it has either understand or